So next up, I'd like to introduce Daria Grigoreva, the title of whose project is Anger, Fear, and Docility, Using Shakta Tantra as a Remedy for Political Disempowerment in the United States.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. Thank you, Stephanie, for providing jobs for LMU Yoga Study graduates. I just want to set a timer for myself here, although I talk very fast when I'm nervous, so I might not even need it. Okay. Hi, my name is Daria, and I am presenting my thesis, Anger, Fear, and Docility Using Shakti Tantra as a Remedy for Political Disempowerment in the United States. And one of the reasons I decided to write about this topic is because 2020 elections is coming up, and it's no secret that on many fronts the United States is in a state of a political crisis, and there's action that needs to be taken, but at the same time we have a problem of political disempowerment. And I kind of talk together about disempowerment and disengagement because I believe that if you don't feel empowered enough, if you don't feel that you have the power to change something, chances are you're not going to be very engaged. And in my preliminary research, what I found to be some contributing structural weaknesses are the system of patriarchy and the problem of elitism. So I was thinking, what is a philosophical framework that I could use to counter these problems? And what came up for me was Shakta Tantra. And the reason is because Shakta challenges both patriarchy and elitism, providing a world-embracing philosophy where there are no gender or caste restrictions into who can practice or even become the guru. And Shakta recognizes the material as manifestation of the divine, which sort of is in counterbalance with the philosophies of transcendence, as Rita Dasgupta Sharma names them. The philosophies of transcendence are the ones that believe that you need to transcend the material reality, transcend this manifest world, in order to achieve enlightenment or liberation or higher spiritual goals. And so in those philosophies, our worldly life is basically seen as an impediment to enlightenment or to liberation, and at the same time in these traditions there is a problem of denigration of the feminine because the feminine is closely associated with the material. So what Shakta says to that is that there's no need to transcend the material. You can use your worldly experience in order to achieve liberation through that. And there is no male-female hierarchy in Shakta Tantra. They are inseparable. And what really sort of clicked for me when I was researching Shakta, because I didn't really know anything about it before my project, was that the feminine principle is seen as the power, the animator. So Shakti, the feminine principle, is the power or the energy, the animator behind the otherwise static principle of Shiva, the masculine. And so since in Shakta the feminine is the power, it prompted me to look at whether disempowerment in the United States could be related to suppression of the feminine. And so I looked at the perception of the feminine both in Indic traditions of transcendence and in Western psychoanalytic traditions. And I particularly looked at the perception of the image of goddess Kali in India and in the West from psychological and sociological perspectives. And here's what I found. I found that there's this phenomenon, what I labeled the feminine split, where there are certain aspects or expressions of the feminine that are accepted, which are docility, nurturing, obedient, loyal, devoted, passive. And then there are certain expressions that are denied or suppressed, that include aggression, anger, expressive sexuality, independence, wildness, and freedom. And I have a picture of goddess Sita here on the left that is kind of an image of a loyal wife, and devotedness and passiveness. And on the right is the image of goddess Kali, who expresses those qualities. And I wanted to see how this phenomenon related to disempowerment. And so for the sake of my research, I decided to focus on one of the suppressed aspects, namely anger, to see how that relates to the problem of political disempowerment. And I will explain that in a bit. Am I too quiet? Okay, sorry about that. So I looked at the problem of suppression of anger, specifically suppression of feminine anger. And when you think about anger, it's really a reaction or an emotion that protects us from injustice. When your boundaries are crossed or when injustice is happening to you or others, it is a natural response, right? And Soraya Chemali, the researcher, she describes anger as a signal emotion that best protects us from injustice. And she also says that currently in our society, men are rewarded for displaying anger while women are penalized. And she notes that people who are able to process their anger and make meaning from it have better political efficacy. And in terms of politics, we often view anger as dangerous and destructive, and it definitely can be. But at the same time, it can bring great positive shifts and transformation when it's used to protest injustice. And suppression of anger then robs women of anger expression as the power to respond and effectively counter injustice, both at an individual level and at the level of the collective. And according to anthropologist Catherine Lutz, anger and really any emotion is a social construct and a cultural category rather than independent, immutable phenomenon. And so it is possible to redefine and reclaim anger and use it in a positive and constructive way. And expression of anger in a healthy manifestation is a crucial asset in political empowerment. And the stigma on expression of female anger then robs women of their voices in the political arena. But the good news is that this is changing quickly and visibly, and last year was named the Year of the Woman because a record number of women were running for office, record number of women were winning House seats, and running currently for president. And here I put pictures of 6 current female presidential candidates. And so I wanted to look at some of these women to see how they are navigating the split and the issue of disempowerment in their presidential campaigns. And I focused on Tulsi Gabbard, Marianne Williamson, and Kamala Harris as the 3 candidates. And in my research, I was doing like in-depth case studies of their presidential campaigns, and I was looking at their social media, their media appearances, basically anything they were saying or writing or producing to find the key messages that they wanted to convey to their audience and to the voters. And while doing that, I was asking how they are mending the split of the feminine, how their campaigns can be seen through the lens of Shakti Tantra, and how they are addressing the issue of political disempowerment. And what I found is that a lot of what these women were saying was actually very much in parallel to some principles of Shakti Tantra. And that includes principles of non-elitism, non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and most importantly, what I found is dedication to truth. And Shakti places a lot of emphasis on the truth. The truth is seen as the ultimate reality, or the capital H heart. And these women are addressing important issues and problems that tend to be swept under the rug and avoided by politicians out of inconvenience and possible controversies and negative pushbacks. And these uncomfortable and at times dark and scary truths are exposed by these candidates in their respective campaigns at the risk of controversy, disagreement, and sharp criticism both from the voters and from fellow politicians. In case of Tulsi Gabbard, it is her bold stance on international relations, especially her stance against the interventionism of the United States in Syria. For Kamala Harris, it's one of her key sort of points of her whole campaign is addressing these uncomfortable truths. And Marianne Williamson is the candidate that I focus on most in my research, because out of these women, not only does she provide most comprehensive and in-depth solution to current crisis, she also directly addresses the issue of political disempowerment and disengagement. And Marianne Williamson comes from a different background than most politicians because she has a 30-plus year career as a spiritual teacher and a best-selling author and inspirational speaker. So she really comes into politics with that spiritual perspective, and a good chunk of her audience are people who are interested in self-development or in matters of spirituality, and I kind of vaguely labeled that group as spiritual seekers. And so she addresses the disempowerment and disengagement of that group specifically, and she points to a problem of an overly individualistic thinking, where she notes that, you know, the questions about what it means to be good, what it means to be ethical, what it means to be moral, what it means to be spiritual are circumscribed within the purview of the personal self, but these questions also need to be applied to the public issues. And talking about the disengagement and disempowerment of this group in particular, she says that one of the reasons is because there has been this promulgated idea that politics is too toxic and not something that we should concern ourselves with. And to that she says, you can call that a lot of things, but don't call it spiritual. There is no spiritual or religious path anywhere that gives any of us a pass on addressing the suffering of other sentient beings. And that really made me think about my personal engagement with politics and how this is the very belief that I have been holding, that, you know, politics is toxic, and I have kind of been seeing my spiritual path or my spiritual interests or my spiritual journey completely separate from what is going on in politics or in the world or around me. Even if I had some interest in the political topics, I kind of didn't really bridge the two, and I saw political issues more of like an impediment to my spiritual path. And to that, both Marianne Williamson and Shakta would say that, you know, the two are actually inseparable, and that it is important to bridge the matters of spirituality with the worldly affairs of politics. And I think that as yoga enthusiasts and teachers and practitioners, we have so many tools of personal transformation that we can now apply to the healing of the collective. And there's really no such thing as individual healing, because we are all one. And we talk about holistic healing, right, as healing the person as a whole. But we also need to take that further and see the person as part of the whole. And so much anxiety, trauma, stress, and depression is coming from the collective and public issues. And millions of Americans are not able to afford basic medical care. Millions of children in America don't have access to adequate school supplies to teach a child how to read. 40% of Americans are unable to cover a $400 emergency expense. And thousands of young adults are graduating college with 150+ K debt. And the fundamental issues of race are not properly addressed, neither is immigration or the man-made climate crisis. And of course, people are chronically stressed and anxious and keep reliving the trauma rather than healing from it. And this is in the United States, mind you, which is one of the richest and most developed countries in the world. And I believe that we are at an important time in human development where we can come to a point where we are ready to shift from the current ineffective structure of politics into one that addresses the needs of the highest good for everyone concerned. And we need politics that are not based in fear and separation, but are based in love. And in order for us to get there, incremental individual change is not enough anymore. And the change has to happen at a state level, at a legislative level. As crucially important as individual effort is, there is only so much that we can do at this level. We can do our best to avoid plastic consumption, for instance, and recycle diligently, and it's extremely important that we do so, but at the same time it's not enough. This change has to happen at a state level. There has to be a major taxation of plastic production, and at the same time, alternative biodegradable material production has to be heavily subsidized. And there is no way we can tackle the challenges of today without getting political. And I believe we have come far in personal transformation, and it is now time to take these tools and make some major shifts in the public and the collective by acknowledging our power and our role as bringers of heart-based politics.
Questions for Daria?
No power. Judith!
Daria, I don't really have a question.
Okay.
But I might be stepping out of my position, my place. But you started out talking about angry women, right? Anger.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a woman, I believe she's at Southern Illinois, Carbondale, Rachel Griffin. And like, I belong to that group of women that's frequently and easily labeled the angry black woman. And she writes about that, but as a feminine force for good. And so maybe I'll try to send you a link to the page.
That would be wonderful. Is that Rage Becomes Her by any chance?
Pardon me?
Is that the book Rage Becomes Her?
I don't know her books. About maybe 6 years ago, I ran into some of her papers.
Uh-huh.
And I don't really know what she's done since then.
Yeah, I would love to read that, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you. That was beautiful, Daria.
Yeah, that was really good. I enjoyed that.
I don't have a question, but I was taken with your passion and how you blended the passion within you and are finding a blended path. It's just extraordinary. Really well done.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So this presidential election year, considering what happened the last 4 years ago when Hillary Clinton didn't get elected, and now we have all this, this activation of a lot of different people running.
Mm-hmm.
What is the path of yoga for people to, both men and women, to relax and maybe get through the next year? Because there's a lot of fear in not even wanting to know what's going to happen. People kind of just want to let the whole year go by. So I think there's a lot of fear in the election.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually something I talk about in my thesis as well, about, this fear that's, it's something beyond individual fear. Of course, we all have fear, anxiety about what's going to happen, but at the same time, there's so much propagated fear in the media and sort of manufactured fear. And what I talk about in my thesis is how much this fear can be really sort of dismantled with truth. And in so many ways, what is happening in politics is just, creating this fear of the other, right? Putting groups against each other, putting nations against each other, people against each other, whatever that is. But when we come back to the truth and really, use maybe the tools of yoga to realize that, this is not true, this is fabricated, and then it takes a lot of fear and pressure off of many groups. And what you said about, using yoga to sort of ease that tension, well, what I'm talking about more is that I think it's time to also use yoga to actually, bring change so that we don't have to deal with all that tension that's coming our way, to bring power back to the people so that, we don't just have mechanisms to cope with whatever's happening around us, but that we can actually change whatever's happening around us. Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting how you became self-aware as well about how you had your own separation between your yoga and your yoga studies and the political side, and it dawned on you how to really make an interconnection on that. And I think a lot of us are guilty of that in different ways, right? I mean, with work versus personal versus this in different ways. And so when you define, maybe it's not a definition of spiritual or spirituality, I mean, to you, could that be something as simple, and it's not simple because I've been trying to practice it myself, mindfulness, but like taking different areas of the yoga studies and seeing what, from an individual perspective, what works. Because spiritual can be something, some people can look at that, something much greater than what it really means to you or to me or to somebody else. And so how do you help gauge that? It's, when you say spiritual.
You mean what do I mean when I say spiritual?
Yes.
Well, honestly, I kind of labeled that as spiritual, but I also imply not only, I guess, spiritual, but also any type of self-development techniques, right? And I think mindfulness is part of that, or any type of awareness, or anything that really helps you navigate this life in a more healthy way. Yeah, I kind of label that all together because I see a lot of sort of crisscrossing between spiritual practices and those types of practices. Yeah.
That's what I assumed. I just wanted to see if there was something
thanks.
more in depth.
Thanks for checking in on that. Yeah.
How do you think the new women representatives in Congress are doing?
I think they're doing great. I mean, it's honestly baffling and so inspiring to see this breath of fresh air. And, when you just see one person in Congress, like when you look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she's just saying the truth.
Yes.
And it's just like this light comes up in this room, and there's just nothing you can do about it, right? You just have to face it. And I think it's incredibly.
Do you know anything about any of those four, their path in terms of what their integration process has been like?
In terms of?
In terms of being able to get to where they are?
For these candidates?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they have different stories. For Kamala Harris, she has been an attorney general for many years before she started running. Tulsi Gabbard is a representative from Hawaii, but they both have been involved in politics for a while. Marianne Williamson comes from a more like spiritual background, but she has been, I think in 1994, she wrote a book about healing the soul of America. Like she has been talking about these things for a while, and in 2014 unsuccessfully ran for Congress. So she has been kind of at it for a bit, but now she's really at it.
Sounds like they're raising the consciousness.
Sounds like it, yeah.
Good job. Good job.